Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Barry's Book Reviews. This is episode number 33, and today I'm talking about another Hwang Sok-yong novel. So I've already reviewed a couple of Hwang Sok-yong's novels on the channel, so you can go and watch those reviews. And there's also an interview with Hwang Sok-yong when he visited Seoul Book Club a few years ago, so please go and watch that as well. And I won't rehash Hwang Sok-yong's biography, because I've mentioned that in previous reviews. But I'll just say that Hwang Sok-yong is, one of the most prominent living Korean novelists. Whenever there's talk of, which Korean novelist will win the Nobel Prize, or which Korean writer has the best chance of winning the Nobel Prize for literature, it's often, or nearly always, Hwang Sok-yong's name that comes up, right? So, he has a career that spans decades, and he's written about all of these, sort of different significant periods in Korean history and some of the big issues of, Korean modern history. And so people think that of all of the Korean novelists and poets, that he has the best chance of winning the Nobel Prize for literature. So Hwang Sok-yong often writes about these, sort of significant periods, significant issues in Korean history. And most recently, he's written his autobiography. It was recently translated into English, called The Prisoner, which refers to a time when he was in jail. He visited North Korea at a time when it was illegal for South Koreans to go to North Korea, but he went to North Korea anyway, and when he came back from North Korea, when he came back to South Korea, he was arrested and he spent, I believe, several years in prison. And so I haven't read this yet. I'm looking forward to reading it this summer vacation if I have time. That's on my TBR list, my to-be-read list. But the experiences that I assume he writes about in that, they're all things that have inspired his novels. So, for example, one of the other things I've reviewed on the channel is The Road to Sampo Kanungil. And that's, a story about sort of itinerant day laborers during the period of Korea's economic sort of rapid industrialization, rapid economic development, share some themes with the book we're going to talk about today. And Hwang Sok-yong was an itinerant day laborer when he was a young man, and so he drew on his experiences for that story. He drew on his experiences visiting North Korea for this book, The Guest. I haven't reviewed that one yet. But again, that mostly takes place in North Korea, and I think it was inspired by his own time visiting North Korea. And then he has this other fantastic book called The Shadow of Arms, which is about the Vietnam War. So again, Hwang Sok-yong, he was a soldier in the Vietnam War. So, and this book is inspired by, I guess, his own experiences as a soldier in Vietnam. Korea sent a platoon of soldiers to assist in the Vietnam War. Fantastic book. And then he also has another book called The Old Garden, which is about the Gwangju massacre, the Gwangju uprising, which is still sort of one of the most sort of sensitive and shameful incidents in Korean modern history. Happened 1980. And so he has all of these sort of big, important books about the some of the significant issues from Korean history. The other book that I've reviewed on the channel is also inspired by North Korea. And again, fantastic book. So today's book, which is Familiar Things, and this book, I think these are my two favorite Hwang Sok-yong books, but I'm also a big fan of Road to Sampo as well. But Princess Barry's about a young woman who, flees North Korea and becomes, a refugee. Anyway, fantastic book, heartbreaking book. But yeah, so today's book is called Familiar Things. And as I've said before, I usually try and buy my Korean novels and Korean books in physical copies, but I needed to review this book, and it was just easier for me to get the ebook at the time. So it's called Familiar Things. It's by Hwang Sok-yong, And it's translated again by Sora Kim Russell, who's translated quite a few of Hwang Sok-yong's books. She also translated Princess Barry, and yeah, right. So Familiar Things is, it's focused on South Korean society, and like stories like The Road to Sampo, it's a story that focuses on the lives of people who live on the fringes of mainstream society. They're people who've been forgotten by economic development, and they're the people who are living on the sidelines. Okay, they haven't been absorbed into the mainstream society. They've been excluded for some reason. And this book in particular, Familiar Things, it shows us a part of Seoul and a lifestyle that we don't often hear about, but that millions of people around the world actually live. And it's a reality that many of us would perhaps, or certainly mainstream media and so on, would probably prefer not to acknowledge, right? We often don't admit the existence of the type of lives that are lived by the people in Familiar Things. So this novel, it begins in the, it's a little tricky to date, precisely, but it seems to be the late 1970s for the most part. Late 1970s, early 1980s in Seoul, South Korea. And so at this period in time, in late 1979, this is when military dictator Chun Doo-hwan had taken control of South Korea following the assassination of Park Chung-hee. And Park Chung-hee had been in power for 18 years or something. I'm forgetting my history. And he was assassinated, and then Chun Doo-hwan takes over, and he was another military dictator, very restrictive. And then a couple of years later, he officially became the fifth president of South Korea, and then he ruled for about a decade. I think he ruled until about 1988. And so the novel takes place roughly at the beginning of his period in power. And, that forms the backdrop for the story that unfolds in Familiar Things. So we're introduced to a young boy who's around 13 or 14 years old at the beginning of the story. His name is Choi Chong-ho. Choi Chong-ho, but for most of the story he's referred to as Bugeye. Lots of the characters in this book have nicknames. So Bugeye's father is taken to a detention camp for undesirables. So this was very common at the time. People who were politically suspect, or they were protesters or demonstrators, or had done something which the military, Chun Doo-hwan's regime, didn't like or approve of, they would often just disappear from the streets. They'd be lifted off the streets and taken to a detention camp. And the family wouldn't know. Sometimes even if they had been taken, and if they did know, they wouldn't know how long they'd be there for, what would happen. So that's what happens at the beginning of the story. And this obviously leaves Bugeye and his mother in a very difficult situation. What will they do for money? How will they survive? How will the community think of them when they have the husband and the father who's been taken away? Will they look down on them? But luckily, or it's the only option she has, there's a job that becomes available to her, and this new job is on this huge sprawling waste landfill site, which is referred to as Flower Island, and it's on the outskirts of Seoul, and it's a place where all of the city's rubbish is deposited, right? And it's it's the leftover garbage that nobody wants. So Bugeye and his mother, they're the leftover people that nobody wants, and they go to work on this huge waste landfill. So Bugeye and his mother, they move there. They have this little shack that's built from debris, built from other people's rubbish, and it's a difficult and unpleasant life, right? The smell is terrible. It's filthy. It's disgusting. It's infested with flies, and it's difficult, tiring, exhausting work. And the story, it's about Bugeye, growing up and coming of age among this community of workers who make their living by sorting the rubbish at this waste landfill site. And at this point in time, Korea and Seoul especially, they were going through this period of redevelopment and modernization, this sort of rapid period of industrialization and economic development. And the people of Flower Island, the workers who work there dealing with this rubbish, sorting the rubbish, they're the people that have been left behind by this economic development. As Korea soars into the future, there are people who are discarded and left behind and who don't get to participate in this sort of rapid generation of wealth and opportunity. They're unwanted, they're uncared for, but together they have their own community, and actually the service they provide, although people don't want to look at it or be aware of it or think about it, that service they provide is vital for the functioning of the rest of this society, which they're excluded from for the most part. It's the underbelly of consumerism and capitalism, and Hwang is sort of showing us what the human cost is of our conspicuous consumption, of our desire to consume, the products of the modern world, right? The things that everybody wants to have in their house and in their pocket, right? There's this entire subculture, an entire sort of shadow economy and way of life that exists out of sight that we don't really want to pay attention to. We don't notice, we don't want to see it, we don't want to think about it. And one of the strengths of this novel is that setting. It really it feels genuine and authentic, it feels real, it feels lived in. The characters are, fantastic. They're all very sort of fully realized and believable. They're flawed, they're sympathetic, they're genuine. Hwang does a really great job of evoking the period. We get these sort of historical details that again just feel real and genuine and authentic, and they're just very sort of compelling and engaging. And it's also just a great coming of age story. I like coming of age stories in general, and this is a great coming of age story. This kid who's from this very difficult background, he's thrown into this challenging situation. He knows that the rest of the world doesn't want him, doesn't want to see him, and it's how he comes to terms with this, and what his life is. And that sort of journey that he goes on is very believable and very honest, and at times painful and sad and moving. And I think Hwang does a great job in that aspect of the novel. Just the escapades that he gets involved in are also just very sort of engaging and interesting. So, for example, he makes friends with another young boy who is referred to as Bald Spot. Bald Spot has learning difficulties, or he's just never received a decent or proper or useful education. But he's the son of the site manager, and together Bugeye and Bald Spot, they explore Flower Island together, and they have a series of small adventures. And think if you relocated something like Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer to a garbage landfill in Korea in the 1980s, you might have a sense of what this novel is about. Another thing that really comes through is that Hwang has real affection for these characters. He loves these characters, and I think lots of readers will love these characters too. I certainly had very warm and strong feelings for them. And despite the unpleasant circumstances, it looks disgusting, it's filthy, and it smells. You're constantly reminded of this. So despite that setting, it's actually a very beautiful and touching and at times soulful story about this young boy growing up and realizing things about the world. Bugeye is a fantastic character to spend time with. And that, the journey that he goes on through adolescence or into adolescence is a universal story, and ultimately I think many readers will find it very moving, just as I did. Overall, Familiar Things, it's a very realistic depiction of life on the fringes of Korean society, during the Chondu-hwan regime. But at the same time, there's also a fantastical element to the story. So in Princess Barry, Hwang Sok-yong does something similar. Princess Barry is this story of an immigrant, a refugee, fleeing their home country. Very sad, very tragic, but it has this, sort of almost magical realist element woven through it, right? And Hwang does something similar in Familiar Things. He does something similar. He weaves some fantastical elements into the novel, right? So the inhabitants of Flower Island, they're not alone on the island. The island is also populated by spirits or ghosts that we could refer to as dogebi. Dogebi is a Korean word meaning, I guess, goblin. And the dogebi is kind of a trickster figure in mythology. But here in this story, the dogebi are friendlier. And they, Bald Spot and Bugeye, they learn about the dogebi. They make friends with a shaman who lives on the island. And this shaman is epileptic, and when she has these epileptic fits, she communicates with the dogebi. And they're kind of ghosts or the spirit of the dead or these sort of dogebi figures. And these spirits, these figures, they often appear to the boys as blue lights. And sometimes these blue lights, they ask the boys for help, or sometimes they offer guidance in some significant ways. And again, I thought that was a very enjoyable element of the story. It's very effective. It's not over the top, and it just works. It just works very well, and I found it very appealing. So if you haven't gathered by now, I genuinely love this book. It's a fantastic book. I think it's a universal story and experience, and something that I think many people can relate to. It also has this great commentary on Korea in the 1980s. Just sort of commentary on consumerism and capitalism and all the rest of it. The atmosphere is fantastic. The writing is excellent, and it's just a very strong recommendation from me. So today's book was Familiar Things by Hwang Sok-yong and translated by Sora Kim Russell. And that's all I'm going to say about it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.